Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the last but not least session on the South Caucasus, a region that usually refers to three main countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. It is bordered by Turkey, Iran, and Russia, and it's not too far away from China and India. This adds to its importance, a geostrategic location. It is considered as a land bridge between Asia and Europe, and it has an importance in that region, but also on the global level. It has been marked by two major conflicts: the 2008 Georgia against Russia war, and the 2020 war that opposed Armenia to Azerbaijan, and it ended with the defeat of Armenia. So against this background, President Raisi, on April of this year, he assured the president of the Armenia that Iran won't allow any geopolitical change in the Caucasus region. So what does he mean by this pledge, and how did he manage the tensions on the Iran-Azerbaijan border? How did he deal with the Turkey and Israel alliance and the growing role in the region, and how he dealt and is still dealing with the importance and hegemony of Russia in the region as well? To reflect on these questions and other foreign policy questions on the South Caucasus, we are very pleased to host, and we're joined by three speakers: Dr. Javad Heiran-Nia from Tehran, and here in Doha we're joined by Dr. Mahmoud Monshipouri and Mr. Rovshan Mammadli. We will start with the first paper on Raisi and Iran's foreign policy toward the South Caucasus, and it's a joint paper that will be presented by Dr. Javad and Dr. Mahmoud, who will split equally the 20 minutes between them. Dr. Javad is an international director of the Gulf Studies Group at the Center of the Scientific Research and Middle East Strategic Studies in Iran. His papers have been published in many prominent international academic journals. His analysis appeared in several leading media outlets. He is currently working on a book project titled Persian Gulf Security Orders. The second co-author of the paper is Dr. Mahmoud Mojiburi. He is professor of international relations at San Francisco State University and a lecturer at UC Berkeley. He is the editor of several books. The most recent one includes Why Human Rights Still Matter in Contemporary Global Affairs, published by Routledge in 2020. He is also the author of Middle East Politics, Changing Dynamics, a book published by Hearst Publishers in 2022. He is the author of several peer-reviewed papers and articles. We're very pleased to have you, and we'll kick off the presentation with Dr. Javad in Tehran. He will be joining us online. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Elbasri. Hello to all dear audiences. Thanks so much. I would like to thank the Iranian Studies Unit of Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for this invitation and opportunity. My special thanks and appreciation to Dr. Mehran Kamrava for this opportunity. I will present the part of joint article with the esteemed Professor Dr. Monshipouri on Raisi and Iran foreign policy toward the South Caucasus, and will emphasize the general framework of Raisi foreign policy, and in the following, Professor Monshipouri will focus on Raisi's foreign policy in the South Caucasus. Please, next slide, Professor Monshipouri. Let me start with the map of the South Caucasus region after 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War. This region consists of Armenian Republic of Azerbaijan and Georgia, and Iran has bordered with Armenia and Azerbaijan. Following the recent Karabakh War, Iran borders with Armenia was reduced to about 40 kilometers, as you can see in the map. Please, next slide, Professor Monshipouri. Here, I would like to present a general picture of Raisi government's foreign policy. In general, the foreign policy of President Raisi toward the South Caucasus can be explained within the broader context of the so-called Look to the East policy framework. This policy is better understood in terms of expanding relation with Latin American, the Caribbean, and Asian Pacific, but with the explicit emphasis on bettering Chinese and Russian relations in the form of long-term agreement. Raisi has also stated that the expansion of relations with the neighbors will be vigorously pursued. Most notably, a high priority has been placed on relationship with Russia for military and political affairs, and China in economic arena. The Look to the East, which puts a high premium on long-term agreement with China and Russia, make it even more difficult to strike a delicate balance in Iran foreign policy between East and the West. This is because Iran's approach emphasized the establishment of a constructive relation with emerging economic power and influential Asian, African, and Latin American actors. In the transformation document of Raisi administration, which was published in March 2022, a special emphasis by place on relation with Eastern and Asian countries, and no name of North America was mentioned to establish a possible relationship. The Raisi administration also launched a serious effort to become a permanent member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization at the Tajikistan Summit in September 2021. At the same time, the signing of long-term cooperation agreement with Russia and push to attain permanent membership in the Eurasian Economic Union topped the Raisi agenda. Next slide, please. One variable that strengthened the policy of Look to the East in Raisi government was the erosion of modern middle class. The middle class is not Raisi supportive class, and he does not concern about them. The modern middle class in foreign policy support relation with the West and in relation to the East calls for balanced relation. The erosion of the middle class will have long-term effect for the future. The effect of this issue can be seen in the continuation of Look to the East and the strengthening of relation with China and Russia under 25 and 20-year cooperation, respectively. At present, anyone who will speak about the balanced foreign policy and criticize the unbalanced relationship with Russia and China will face the criticism. Earlier, Javad criticized Russia's negative role in the nuclear talk. His remarks about Russia met with widespread opposition from conservatives. It should be noted that Look to the East also means strengthening the value system of conservatives, because cooperation with Russia and China, in addition to meeting some economic, political, military needs of Iran, will boost the conservative value system. Next slide, please. The decline of economic situation on one hand and frustration of middle class from political system on the other hand has led to the results of the recent parliamentary and presidential elections in Iran and the victory of Ebrahim Raisi. As you can see in this graph, the middle class income has declined sharply, especially when Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA. It should be noted that performance of the reformists themselves and their gradual remove from power over the past years, and the presence of reformists in power who are not the real representative of the middle class in Iran, led to middle class political non-participation in the recent elections. Next slide, please. The South Caucasus region is, by Moscow definition, part of Russia's near abroad, although the Caucasus is an important region of strategic military security and economic interest to Russia today, it poses a security threat to it. The geopolitical and geostrategic changes that unfold in the 1990s weakened Russia's position in the South Caucasus, significantly diminishing its political and economic clout in the region at the time when NATO have become more active in the region. Russia's invasion on Ukraine was apparently a reaction to NATO's expansion eastward that would reach a Russian border with the inclusion of Ukraine, intensifying Putin's sense of encirclement. The invasion demonstrated, among other things, that Russia was by no means willing to tolerate a NATO presence in its neighbor abroad, including the South Caucasus, understandably. The foreign policy of Iran and Russia toward this region overlap at the threat of separatism and terrorism has increasingly cast its shadow over the region. Next slide, please. Both Tehran and Moscow appear to be worried about the implication of growing Turkish influence in the region. Moscow increasing concern about Turkey's regional influence is clearly illustrated in its attempt to revive talks regarding a massive project involving Russia and Iran. I mean the North-South Corridor that you can see the map in the next slide. Next slide, please. This issue was also taken into consideration during Putin's recent visit to Iran, and even he emphasized the completion of the unfinished railway section of Rasht and Anzali port. Next slide, please. While both Russia and Iran oppose the presence of non-regional powers in the Caucasus, the two countries compete with one another in the region energy transmit route and pipelines. For example, while Tehran considers the creation of Zhang Zoo Corridor a threat to its national security, the Kremlin views it differently and even supports it for a variety of reasons. About 2 weeks ago, Russia deployed its military forces on the border of Iran and Armenia, and it is estimated that this action is aimed to creating this corridor. Russia also wants Iran to approve the legal regime of Caspian Sea, while the other four countries have ratified the October Convention. Iran has thus far refrained from ratifying it, as it has come under fierce public criticism for conceding too much of its territorial right. While Iran was preoccupied with the Vienna negotiation to revive the nuclear talk, JCPOA, Russia called on Iran to ratify the convention immediately. In fact, Russia tacitly made its support for Vienna summit conditional on Iran ratifying the convention. Let me stop here and turn it over to Professor Monshipouri. Thanks so much.
Gratitude to Professor Kamrava, who kindly invited me, and thank you so much for the warm reception. I will also like to give a shout out to Hamide Khanum and Mr. Motaz, who made it possible and coordinated a lot for my presence here. My deep gratitude to the Center, to the Arab Studies Center for Research here, also Iranian Studies. I'm delighted to be here. I don't know how much time Dr. Heiran-Nia has left for me, but I'll just try to be as quick as possible.
Still have 10 minutes.
I'm sorry?
We still have 10 minutes.
Very good. Thank you so much. You're being kind and gracious. Appreciate it. Russia faces many challenges in the area, but as Dr. Heiran-Nia said, most of the challenges have to do with gas and oil transit routes, and Russia is basically watching this development because any alternative to Russian gas routes would be a danger to the dominance and hegemonic power of the Russia in that part of the world. growing and tenacious separatist and terrorist operations also a major problem for Russia. The initiative for peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan was taken up by the Europeans at some point, and Russia was vehemently against that. So that actually didn't actually fly very well with the Russians. Iran and Russia are in a competition. Sometimes they are in some kind of cooperation, but most of the competition has to do primarily, I would say, with the energy supply and transit routes. Russia has not allowed Iranian gas to reach Georgia via Armenia. After the Ukrainian war, Russia has opposed Iran's entry into the energy market. And as of July 2022, 1 month ago, Gazprom had an agreement with the Iranian oil company, which I think is amounted to $40 billion. I don't know the details of that. All I know is that this type of agreement could pretty much limit Iran's maneuver and movements in as far as the energy is concerned. Let me talk about Zhang Zoo Corridor, which I think is very important. I would argue that not only it is important, but is a game changer. A game changer in many sense. Iran has two land connection with South Caucasus. One is through Armenia, the other one is through Azerbaijan. Zhang Zoo Corridor cuts the land routes between Iran and Armenia. The corridor cuts off Iran's access to the Black Sea and also to Europe through Armenia and Georgia. All of these will profound tremendous challenges to Iran, geopolitically speaking. If you look at the map of Zhang Zoo Corridor, you see that the corridor will make it possible for Azerbaijan to have direct access to the autonomous region of Nakhchivan. And if that is possible, then it's also important for Turkey to get direct access to Azerbaijan, not through Iran, but rather directly through Azerbaijan. When first this initiative came on, the Russian kind of a slow walked that, and they gave the impression that they're not quite, in agreement with that. But what really happened, two important developments really changed the Russians' opinion in favor of the creation of this corridor. One was the second Nagorno-Karabakh War, and the other one was the disastrous Ukrainian war. So I'll talk about this in a moment. Let's talk about the second Karabakh War and its ramifications. The Karabakh War solidified the Republic of Azerbaijan's ties and relations with Turkey and Israel. Cooperation between Baku and Tel Aviv further increased through this war, bringing Israel very close to the northern border of Iran, something that makes Iranians very nervous. The war has caused Baku and Ankara to focus more on separatist ethnic fault lines against Iran because of the Iranian Azeris population that consists approximately 20% of the Iranian population. For Turkey to gain access to Zangezur directly to Azerbaijan is part of what we call connectivity game plan. And the connectivity game plan is for Turkey to gain access not only to Azerbaijan, but through Azerbaijan into the Persian, the Caspian Sea, and through Caspian Sea to Central Asian Republic. Suddenly, the connectivity becomes a very important strategic argument for them. That makes Iranian very worried because it brings a NATO member closer to their borders. This initiative, known as 3+3, the three South Caucasus countries and the three dominant regional players, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, which is known as Six Nation Platform, is an initiative that nobody knows exactly who has started it. The Turkey says that I started it. Russians would say that we first announced that alongside of Amir Abdullahian, Iranian foreign minister, and Lavrov, and we said that Iranians I've also said this was part of our initiative. Regardless of whose initiative it is, Russians, the Turkish, Iranians, and Azeris, they all supported it after the Nagorno-Karabakh. Iran's policy, it seems to me that it is not to interfere with the Russians' interest in the Caucasus as best as they could. They could avoid the conflict. Iran's economic interest in the region dictates right now that Iranians come to sense and to terms with the fact that Nagorno-Karabakh, the second war, has changed profoundly realities on the ground, that the whole political equation has changed. They can no longer actually think in terms of the past. They have to adjust to the realities. Iran has serious concern or real concerns, but some people call them red lines. Let's find out what are those red lines are. And here I would underscore 5 points. The expansion of NATO to the borders of South Caucasus is a red line for Iranians. Iranians would not like to see a member of NATO, that is to say, Turkey, get close to the borders. Iran's growing presence in the Republic of Azerbaijan, Israel's growing presence in the Republic of Azerbaijan is another red line that Iranians have made it perfectly clear. Maintaining the connection between Iran and Armenia and not changing the current borders of the region. Iranians have made it perfectly clear that the severance of the land connection with Armenia is a no-no. There is no way that they can agree with that. And ending the provocations of Azeri separatists, and finally maintaining Iran's position in the north-south corridor that is a land connection all the way from Moscow to Mumbai through Bandar Abbas. And it's this point that was articulated by Dr. Heiran-Nia very nicely. Let me talk about Iran's strategic goals, and I will get closer to wrap up my talk here. Iran's strategic goal, number one, is to avoid any conflict whatsoever with Russian interest and try to cooperate with Moscow where and when possible. That's the policy that doesn't change. It has not changed. It doesn't matter who is in power, Raisi, Hassan Rouhani, or whatever. It's the general policy of the country. Example of that would be Iranians would like to expand relations with Russia. In the recent agreement, a 20-year agreement that they have signed with them has really brought the Russians' influence over Iran. Many scholars in the West, in the United States, Shirin Antar and others will argue that this agreement could really bring total domination of Moscow over Tehran. Minimizing the differences with Azerbaijan by trying to kind of work with Azerbaijan in terms of creating interdependency through gas swap or creating a corridor from Nakhchivan to Baku through Iran. And finally, Iranians are talking about the regional integration. And what do they mean by that? They mean that they are seeking permanent membership in the Euro-Asian Economic Union known as EAEU. And the current members of that are Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia. Let me talk about Turkey's balancing act. And then I'll actually have one last slide after that. Thank you. If you allow me, I'm going to use a legal metaphor here. Raisi is interested in divorce with some kind of reconciliation within the context of the JCPOA with the United States. What Erdogan is doing, forgive me for that expression, but Erdogan wants to split the baby in the court of regional geopolitics. How would you split the baby between husband and wife? I think Erdogan is doing that right now. What he does is that he sells drones to Ukraine, and they are fatally effective in Ukraine against Russia, but then he says to Russia, let me work with you. If you cannot send your gas and your oil because of the Western sanctions, I can make it possible to use my transit to Europe. So what Turkey is doing geopolitical competition with Russia, but at the same time, they are keen on doing geoeconomic with Russia. How can you manage to do that? You know, it doesn't matter how smart you are, ultra, super smart, but at some point, this is a contradiction at work. You know, I don't know how you can solve. That's why I'm using the term splitting the baby. There are some countries in the region, such as Kazakhstan, who are saying that we might be the next target of Russia, and so they are worried about that, and they are kind of leaning toward Turkey as opposed to Russia.
2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Wonderful timing, because I have 4 takeaways from this talk. Tehran's animosity toward Washington has created a kind of permanent addiction. And that addiction is reliance and deepening reliance on Russia. I want to slightly disagree with my wonderful friend and colleague, Dr. Mousavian, who mentioned yesterday the mindset of Rahbar or supreme leader in Iran is that any relationship or signing any agreement with Moscow doesn't mean that we are deepening our dependency. I think if Iran is not moving towards some kind of accommodation with the West, but is driven into the arms of China, speaking of China, and Russia, this creates dependency. I don't know, there's no other way out of it. Because the more you become reliant on Russia, the more you become dependent, and that dependency deepens to the point that you become completely dependent on the other party. This unbridled gravitation toward Russia could further have some, negative complications for a country that I would argue that is, at this point, has a very weak position in South Caucasus. Tehran's real concern is Ankara's strategy to beef up relations with Baku, aimed at expanding pan-Turkism in the region. I think this is a legitimate concern. And finally, Iran's foreign policy towards South Caucasus has always been driven not by ideology, but by pragmatism. It was a point that was articulated by Bernard this morning, very nicely. And when Iranians talk about stability and regionalism, I don't think they are saying that they want to join the Euro-Asian Economic Union because it's very important to be part of that group. I don't think there's that much economic advantage for Iran to be part of that group. But what is important for Iranian, when they say regionalism, they don't mean regional integration. They mean one thing, and that one thing is basically make sure third parties are out of our borders. Make sure outsiders, external powers are not coming to our region. This is what they mean by regionalism. They don't mean economic integration. So let me finish at this point and end it at this point. Thank you so much. Very good.
Thank you so much for this very invaluable presentation, and I'm glad you managed to split not the baby but the time. And given the importance of changes introduced by the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict or war, we will continue on with another perspective that will be presented by Rovshan Mammadli, who is a student in international political science in Lithuania, and his primary focus is on the security dimension of Azerbaijan-Iran relations. He has published numerous articles in Azerbaijan press and in regional media. So his paper will tackle the issue of 3 challenges facing Iran after the Nagorno-Karabakh War. Please go ahead.
Thank you for hosting me, and I am glad to be here. So first, I want to point out that the Iranian approach on South Caucasus, especially on Azerbaijan, Iran's realized that it cannot be a constructive force in Azerbaijan, like in Middle East, cannot achieve to change something. And in this regard, Iran's interest is to protect itself as much as possible from the risks may come from this region. And the Second Karabakh War, of course, it changed drastically the security architecture in South Caucasus, and Azerbaijan regained the territories in and around Nagorno-Karabakh, and it resulted in Armenia's defeat. And it brought three challenges for Iran. First one is the Israel growing presence in Azerbaijan. The second one is Turkey growing influence in Azerbaijan. And the third one, Azerbaijan's claims on Syunik or Zhang Zoo Corridor. And that's also a security risk from Iranian perspective. And I should mention that the territories which Azerbaijan regained, it consisted of two parts. First one is Nagorno-Karabakh. It is Armenian populated, mostly, and surrounding regions, districts of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is Azerbaijan populated territory. And both parts are internationally recognized of Azerbaijan as an Azerbaijan territory. And there is a consensus and not any discussions or etc. So in this regard, it is very clear that Azerbaijan's victory, Israel's drones technology played a crucial role to overcome Armenian positions, military falsificated positions, etc., and to win the war. And Azerbaijan's ties with Israel is not secret any longer. And Azerbaijan sells oil to Israel, and Israel sells weapons to Azerbaijan. But it's, of course, it's not one-dimensional relation. It's not one-dimensional relations, and it contains some details that a wider public is unaware of it. And because of Azerbaijan, Israel gains to access to encircle Iran more, to gain to large Azerbaijani minority in Iran. Also, one fact: Azerbaijan used Israeli-made drones and surveillance technologies in borders with neighboring countries, and including Iran. And of course, it enables to Israel to increase its intelligence operations in Iran. And it has story and background that we know that 10 years ago, when Iranian scientists, nuclear scientists, 4 scientists were assassinated by Israel, and that time Iran accused of Azerbaijan of to assist Israel to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists. So in this regard, Iranians' concerns regarding Israel is quite understandable and reasonable. And because the Azerbaijan restored its border with Iran in Karabakh, and it enabled Israel more access to Iranian border and to encircle Iran more. And the second point is about Turkey. Turkey, of course, we know that Turkey and Iran is a rival in Iraq, Syria, and in South Caucasus as well, and growing Turkish presence, pan-Turkish sentiment, or etc., and they concern as Iran. And we remember just last year when, after the 1 month after the war, after the victory of Azerbaijan, President Erdogan in Shusha in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and he recited Azerbaijani poet Bakhtiar Vahabzadeh poem, which contains longing for unity of so-called North and South Azerbaijan. And that time, Iran reacted very harshly, and Iranian foreign minister tweeted that actually with this poem, Erdogan put Azerbaijan's sovereignty into question, because this poem is about the forced separation of Azerbaijan from its homeland, Iran. And Iran summoned Turkish ambassador to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Turkey did the same. And the third one is Iran, in this regard, Iran is concerned that Turkish growing presence in Azerbaijan will increase the pan-Turkish sentiment in Iran, and will create some security risk for Iranian territorial integrity. The third one is the Zhang Zoo Corridor, and actually the agreement between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia on November 10th in 2020 stipulates that the corridors, communications ways between Azerbaijan, between Nakhchivan, its enclave of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan should be restored, should be opened. But how? The question is that Azerbaijan claims that it should be corridor, it should have special status, and there shouldn't be any Armenian customs or any control of Armenia. But Armenia says that it should be the usual way between countries, between neighboring countries. There should be customs, taxes, etc., etc. And also in the first case, in the first version, it should be it should have status. There will be Russian presence, Russian military officers, and they will control Azerbaijan exports to Nakhchivan, or Nakhchivan export, what will it will contain, etc. And in this regard, Azerbaijan present in the level of President Ilham Aliyev, and he says that if Armenia will not open those way willingnessly, Azerbaijan can use the military force to open this corridor. But it is not for the. It's in such discourses, such rhetorics, Ilham Aliyev mostly focused on the internal public society, Azerbaijan society, because those territories, Zangezur, Syunik, and these are Armenia's territory. And if Azerbaijan use military force, not just Iran, also international community will react harshly, and Azerbaijan cannot do this and cannot risk this, Ilham Aliyev. And Ibrahim Raisi, when he came to power, there were these three challenges for Iran. And in this context, the most harsh, most tense point of Iran-Azerbaijan relation was the Iranian military drills, Fateh Khaybar, Congress of Khaybars, which Iran conducted in 2021 on October. And Iran conducted these military drills on Azerbaijan borders. In the first time in decades, in the first time in the last 30 years, it was the first time Iran conducted such large military drills exercises on Azerbaijan border. And those times it accompanied by Iranian civil government officials that they repeated that Amr Abdullahian says that Iran will not accept any border changes in the region. Iran will not accept to be heard like takfiris. He referred to Syrian fighters because Iran, during the war, Iran claimed that Iran accused of Azerbaijan that Azerbaijan used Syrian fighters, deploy Syrian fighters from Syria to fight with Azerbaijan against Armenia. And but with the name of this military drills, Congress of Khaybar, it's historical battle between Muslims and Jewish, Iran actually referred to Israel. And Amr Abdullahian again said that despite Iran repeated that it's not about Azerbaijan, it's about Iranian sovereignty, stability in the region, etc. But in these military drills, Iran reflected these three challenges. Turkish presence, because Iran conducted these military drills after the three brothers drills of Pakistan, Turkey, and Azerbaijan in September. In September 2021, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, and Turkey conducted military drills in Caspian Sea together, and Iran at that time reacted harshly and criticized those drills that those countries doesn't have right to conduct such drills because Pakistan and Turkey is not located on Caspian Sea, and this is unlawful. And after 1 month, Iran conducted those drills as a reaction. And those times, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps started to leak videos, and different officials repeated about Syrian fighters and regional changes in regional configurations. But it's very interesting that after the 1 month, in November, Azerbaijani and Iranian presidents met in Turkmenistan, Ashgabat, and signed a new deal, gas swap deal, and new agreement. And Ibrahim Raisi mentioned that Azerbaijan shouldn't let to US, and we shouldn't use US and Israel to harm the friendly relations between Iran and Azerbaijan. And Aliyev assured him that Azerbaijan will not let any side to harm its relations with Iran. But it is very interesting that such periodic tensions between Azerbaijan and Iran happens each year almost, and from time to time, and it will continue. And it was not the last and not least, and these tensions will continue. And I think the Iranian and I believe in that trade and business deals and partnerships between Azerbaijan and Iran can reduce such periodic tensions. And if Iranian nuclear deal would be achieved, it will bolster Azerbaijan-Iran's trade relations as well. And we shouldn't be maximalist. Iran will not take a stance on Karabakh conflict like Turkey will not take a stance, harsh anti-Armenian stance for Azerbaijan, for gaining support from Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan will not abandon its pro-Western stance in favor of Iran. And Azerbaijan will not attack to Syunik, to Armenia, to gain more territories. Because in this case, it would be the violation of the territorial integrity of another country, Armenia, and Ilham Aliyev cannot take, Azerbaijan cannot take this risk again. Thank you. I think, yeah.
Thank you for completing the first paper and for shedding light on the Israeli perspective in terms of the aftermath of the Nagorno-Karabakh War. And before opening the floor to the public for questions, I would like to broaden a little bit the issue and touch on the role of China. We haven't much touched on this issue, and it's believed that over the last decade, China has been playing a growing role in the South Caucasus, and it is not clear if it's challenging Russia. It doesn't look like it, but it is an important role in the region, and I would like to see if there is anything from the Raisi presidency, one-year presidency, that deals with China and its role in the South Caucasus, and what kind of role, if you can elaborate on it. Thank you.
Yes, one thing about China is that China doesn't take side. That's its basic strategy. In Persian Gulf, in the Mediterranean, in the rest of the world, China is not in the habit of taking sides. So it kind of works with all governments. From the business point of view, because China is so keen on promoting its Belt and Road Initiative, and because Turkey is that middle belt of connection between this part of Asia and Mediterranean, any agreement, and especially that you mentioned, the JCPOA, any agreement that facilitates Iran's entry into the energy market or having a normal relationship or any development that adds to political stability of the region would be absolutely in kilter and in sync with China's interest. So China is interested more, first and foremost in political stability, and also the fact that it doesn't matter for China whether, in fact, China is in favor of some kind of ironically, paradoxically, in favor of the Zhang Zoo Corridor, because it feels that it could create some kind of, connections between Turkey and Azerbaijan and so on and so forth. It doesn't think in terms of geopolitical impacts of that for Iran or in what ways Iranians' red lines are things. Turkey's, China is just thinking straightforward in terms of economic and trade deals. And that's the way that I see that.
Thank you. And I also think that the interests of China and Russia do converge in the South Caucasus.
Correct.
Especially in the lack of interest on the part of the Western nations, the US and its allies. It doesn't look like they're, right now, they're busy with other fronts. It does like in the South Caucasus, they're making any kind of moves of challenging this, I don't know if we can call it a small microcosm, emerging multipolar order in that region, which right now, the Western allies are not.
Not to mention that both of them are the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Can I add?
Yes,
Sorry.
Gentlemen, and we'll move to you. Yes. It's working.
Now is working, yes. My name is Musa Elaya. I'm from the Public Administration program here at DI. Thank you so much, speakers, for this very interesting topic and also presentations. And you are talking about the Azeri-Armenian war, and we know very well that the Azeri community is a Shiite, but Iran is supporting Armenia against its neighbor and the Shiite state. In this aspect, why does Iran focus on shifting countries like in Yemen, Syria to be Shiites, but it is unable to control its neighboring Shiite community? Do you think this situation is driven by nationalism more than religion, and therefore we can say there is a secret war between Persian nationalism against Turkish or Arab nationalism, especially that the Adaris in Turkey and Iran representing more than 30%, not just only 20% what you mentioned. Iran is afraid that there is a powered Azeri state that can also become a problem or a risky situation for Iran to be stable inside, especially when the Azeris inside Iran will be more powered, especially they are ruling, they are really ruling the economic system inside Iran. The Azeris inside Iran, they have also more control for businesses and the economic side. So maybe they can be a risky situation for the stability of the Persian regime internally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you for your interesting presentations. I have a question for the authors of both presentations. Do you think this factor of the perceived potential NATO extension to South Caucasus and intensified ties between Israel and Azerbaijan might finally compel Iran to ratify the Caspian Convention? Because without that, Iran, if I'm not mistaken, has no legal basis for demanding the expulsion of non-literal states' armed forces from Caspian waters. Thank you.
Okay. The gentleman next to, yes.
Thank you for both presentations. My question is from Professor Monshipouri. Professor Monshipouri, I would like to know how would you analyze the Raisi's approach to regionalization and tightening relationship with Azerbaijan in the context of Iran pan-Turks. So I was wondering to what extent Baku is involved with these kind of movements in Iran's Turk provinces, which we know Islamic Republic is so sensitive about. And generally, I would like to know if you think they are more inspired by Baku or by Turkey. So it would be interesting to know how this factor would impact the bilateral relationship with these two countries.
Thank you. In the back, yes, and then, okay.
Thanks a lot. Şaban Kardeş from Qatar University, also from Turkey. Elephant in the room seems to be Turkey today. So there is much talk about Turkey and Turkey's potential role or effect. A couple of points. Firstly, regarding this 3+3 initiative, I would say it came from Turkey, not because I am Turkish, because there is a precedent to it. As a matter of fact, in 2008, during the Russian-Georgian conflict as well, Turkey proposed a similar mechanism, also in the latest episode. Turkey did circulate a similar idea, and then the Iranian foreign minister took the initiative, took a tour of the relevant countries. Another point of clarification about Rovshan, this poem crisis, and technically Iran did not summon the Turkish ambassador nor Turkey. It was just invitation for questioning, but not technical summoning in a diplomatic language, as far as I know. We can check it later, just a point of clarification. Regarding Dr. Mahmoud's characterization of Turkey's policy, I don't know, Iranians claim to be always pragmatist when it comes to analyzing their foreign policy. Iran claims to be pragmatic in its foreign policy approach, but when it comes to Turkey, it seems the emotions, the chemistry, feelings are playing more important role than sound pragmatic policy analysis. From a perspective, pragmatic foreign policy analysis perspective, Turkey's policy on the current Russia-Ukraine war makes perfect strategic sense. I won't go into details, we can discuss it later. So for that, we don't need to come up with such metaphors like dividing the baby. So there is no dividing of the baby. Turkey is doing what a nation state has to do, which is to look after its own national self-interest in this particular crisis. All these points that the doctor referred to regarding the oil imports, gas imports, the European countries did not stop importing. So why is it for Turkey to stop the transit?
Any
So
questions? Any
okay,
questions?
so the problem is regarding also the South Caucasus, the corridor, the Iranian reactions. To me, it shows that the Iranian foreign policy, to a large extent, driven by the ontological insecurity rather than real pragmatic considerations. I would appreciate if doctor could explore on that. Also, the previous question referred to the position of the large Turkish population within Iran. So this ontological insecurity, how it plays a role in shaping Iranian conduct, not only in the South Caucasus, but also in the broader region. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take the last question, and then probably, if you have time, we'll come back to you. Thank you.
If Iran signs nuclear agreement, will Iran position become more assertive? Will Iran position the Caucasus and other areas will change? And second question, if Iran so far has been able to maintain good ties with both Armenia and Azerbaijan, my sense is that there will be third war and the conflict is frozen conflict. How long can Iran play both sides? Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take the last question. Ay, ay, ay. It's okay.
Yes.
My name is Kazuto Matsuda. I'm a Mehran Studies student in Qatar University. Thank you for the very informative presentations. My question goes to the past paper by Dr. Heiran-Nia and Dr. Monshipouri. During the presentation, it was mentioned that Iran has been looking to the east, including China. Regarding that point, should we understand or interpret this strategy as an ad hoc foreign policy strategy, or rather a long-term strategy that can be expected to last even after Iran overcomes the current crisis that the country is facing? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a round of questions. We still have about 15 minutes. Okay, so we'll start with our guest from Tehran, Dr. Javad, if we can connect with him. Okay, let's hear from him. He's around.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with the last question about the East policy of the Raisi administration. It should be noted that look to the East foreign policy is not a new one in Iran foreign policy. It rooted to after war with Iraq. After Iran revolution until the end of Iraq war, we can analyze Iran foreign policy according agent-based foreign policy, that Iran deny any international norms and deny international system. But after Iraq war, Iran accepted the structure-based foreign policy. I mean this Iran accepted the structuralism in its foreign policy. So look to the East should be considered in this context. And I mentioned in my lecture that look to the East in Raisi presidency is different from Ahmadinejad. And one domestic reason is the erosion of Iranian modern middle class, and we didn't see this this issue in Ahmadinejad era, and after Ahmadinejad, we can see modern middle class participated in presidential election. But recently, I mean about 2 years ago, and with the erosion of a middle class and the reformists from political structure of Iran, modern middle class did not participate in Iran parliamentary and presidential elections, and this led to victory of Ibrahim Raisi and unification of a political structure in Iran. And for this reason, and because modern middle class in Iran go beyond the political structure, and for this reason, I can predict the future foreign policy of Iran toward east. And I mentioned even in transformation document of Ibrahim Raisi that about 5 pages are about foreign policy, that no anywhere there is no name of North America to potential relationship. And regarding to China role in the South Caucasus, I would like to add a point to Professor Monshipouri. Both China and Russia are allies, but have their competition in the region and in the international system. For China, reaching to Europe according to One Road, One Belt initiative is important, and China will differentiation their route to Europe, and for this reason, the middle route that cross from Central Asia, Caspian, and Azerbaijan, and from Azerbaijan to Turkey, and from Turkey to Europe is very important for China.
Thank you so much, and we'll turn now to Rovshan. If you can please just answer to 1 or 2 questions in 3 minutes. Thank you.
The question is that why Iran doesn't support Shia majority of Azerbaijan, but Christian, Muslim Christians of Armenia. And frankly, Iran, the first years of the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflicts in the 90s, Iran did support Azerbaijan, and that time Azerbaijan saw Iran as a Azerbaijan-sided mediator player in Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict, and through the Iran first time in Azerbaijan-Armenian conflict, Azerbaijan and Armenia achieved a ceasefire in 1992. But then Armenians and Iran at that time, Iranian military officers trained Azerbaijani military, and also Iran helped to Azerbaijan to rescue Afghanistan fighters for fighting in the Karabakh War. But Armenian successive military victories hampered Iranian mediation efforts. In 1992, on May 8, during the negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Iran, Armenia continued to occupy Azerbaijan's territories, cities, and Azerbaijan started to accuse Iran that because of you, Armenia occupied those territories while we were in the negotiations, or while we were in peace talks. And then this defeat led to regime change in Azerbaijan, government change in Azerbaijan, and Abulfazl Chibay, pan-Turkic president, came to power. And he completely refused, rejected any mediation and any efforts from Iran, and even publicly claimed, made territorial claim on Iran. He said that he started to talk about the unity of South and North Azerbaijan and etc. And then Iran realized that it doesn't make sense to help Azerbaijan, and then Azerbaijan got close to Israel and America, USA, and Iran started to take a balanced role between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but didn't support. Also, Iran always supported by law international territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, but didn't support totally Azerbaijan to put pressure on Armenia.
Thank you. Thank you
Sure.
so much. And we'll close the answer questions with Dr. Mahmoud.
Thank you so much. We don't have that much time to address all the questions, but I will address
3
three.
minutes.
I will address 3 of them. I am intrigued with your question about why is that Iran in one situation acts this, but other situation completely differently. You know that Iranian position vis-a-vis Armenia changed after the Second Karabakh War. Iran changed its position and came down heavily on the side of the Azerbaijan because of the sensitivities to its Azeris population. So Iranian position vis-a-vis the Karabakh has not been consistent. But then again, if you compare that with a different situation in Yemen, because the situation is specific, and now Iran is in a proxy war against Saudi Arabia, that changes the whole complexion of the picture. So I don't know whether these situations can be comparable. If Iran acts in one situation this way, why it should not act consistently in other situations? Because the situations are, context sensitive, and Iranians are looking at, Iranians have for a long time supported Armenia. You're absolutely right, despite the fact that Azerbaijan, Republic of Azerbaijan, is a Shiite-dominated country. But then they changed their position because they realized that, things on the ground have changed, and so they made the adjustment. With regard to Dr. Amir's question, yes, when Recep Tayyip Erdogan recites poetry about the Aras River and provokes the sentiment of separation, and you can argue that it is like this is part of the pan-Turkish thing, but at the end of the day, it's about Turkey's access to Azerbaijan, and beyond that, and it comes down to 3-letter OIL. It's about that, because that's what the Erdogan is thinking. In a country that does not have a drop of gas and oil, getting access to oil is a big deal. So if they can provoke certain sentiments to bring this into the totally Turkish sentiment, I think Erdogan has been very effective in doing that, despite the fact that it actually creates some kind of political problem and tensions with Iran. Because of the lights, I cannot see my Turkish friends. I don't know where my Turkish friend is sitting. Tanıştığıma memnun oldum. Where are you? Right there. Can you raise your hand so that I can see you? Yeah, tanıştığıma memnun oldum, my friend. I just said in Turkish, good to see you. I think you're right. To some extent, you're right, because the Iranians are suffering from what we call paranoia complex. You see, you folks in Turkey are part of the NATO. The GCC members have their own groups. To the east of Iran, you have nuclear-equipped Pakistan and India. If you look at the Iranian, Iranian in a tough neighborhood, left alone with no connection with any political military structure. So they suffer from this paranoia, complex, and insecurity that you very nicely articulated it. I agree with you. But that's only one part of the picture. The other part of the picture is the way that Turkey is expanding its influence in areas that are concerned to Iran. So it's not all about insecurity. Although I agree with you, insecurity is a good part of the problem. I think we have to stop at this point, is that right? Yeah, I still have some time. Yes. With regard to JCPOA, my good friend talked about it a few minutes ago. I think agreement with the United States will drastically change Iranian bargaining position in the area. 7 years ago, Professor Kamrava published a book called New Game in West Asia that I had the good fortune of contributing a chapter. My conclusion at the end of that chapter was that unless Iran solves its problem with the West more generally, with the United States more particularly, Iran would not have a very good bargaining position in South Caucasus. And its bargaining position in South Caucasus will be totally stalemated until they find a way to accommodate their interests with the Western world. I stick to that position, and I think it still is a valuable position, is a valid argument. Thank you.
No, we don't have much time. Sorry. Thank you so much for, thank you all for contributing to this session, which shed lights on the missing picture for the foreign policy of President Raisi for the first year. Before we say goodbye, we turn to Dr. Kamrava for his closing remarks. And sorry for those of you who have more questions, probably we can address them later, but the time has run. Yeah, just we keep that. Later.
Dr. Ahmadi will have plenty of time.
Yes.
As you can see, the topic is endless, and so hopefully we'll have lots of opportunities. Let me start by thanking everyone who's made this possible. This wouldn't have been possible without Hamide, wouldn't have been possible without Nagam, Motaz, the entire team, Ibrahim, everybody who's been invaluable, and you guys have my sincere gratitude.
Let's give them a big round of applause.
Absolutely. 2.5 years ago, we started the Iranian Studies Unit with the hope of bringing Iran to the Arab world and the Arab world to Iran, bridging the gap. And one of the things we've decided, or one of the things we hope to accomplish, is to impress upon Iran and the Arab world that they have far more in common than they have differences. And hopefully this has been a major leap in that direction that we've been able to take. And for that, I'm most grateful to everyone who's been involved. When we started this conference yesterday, I invited us to think through some of the topics that would be discussed over the next 2 days. And I said that I hope that by the end of the conference we have more questions than answers, but at least we're able to discuss those questions in far more prescient and intelligent way. And I sincerely think that we've accomplished that goal. For me, at least, I come out today far more informed thanks to the brilliant presentations that we've heard over the last 2 days than I started the conference with. We have discussed two broad areas of foreign policy and domestic politics. In terms of foreign policy, of course, the major question that is on the forefront of the minds of all of us observers of Iran, here and elsewhere, is the nuclear negotiations and the outcome of the nuclear negotiations. Still, we're waiting to hear from the Americans in terms of their response to what Iran has already responded. And so we're waiting to hear that. It was first in Tehran, of all people, from the current Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Ghalibaf, that I heard the term win-win scenario. And what Ghalibaf was talking those days during the Ahmadinejad presidency was Iran and the United States searching for a win-win scenario. And I think one of the themes that has been running through this conversation over the last 2 days isn't just the nuclear negotiations in themselves, but whether Iran and the United States can come up with a win-win scenario in relation to this strategically important region. And part of that equation that we have heard again and again over the last 2 days has been Iran and the GCC in general, and Iran and Saudi Arabia in particular. And of course, the background to that has been Iran's relations with Israel, which has been tremendously important. We've also heard really interesting discussions of Iran's relationship with South Asia and particularly with Africa in terms of Iran's rediscovery under the Raisi presidency of the importance of making diplomatic inroads in Africa. Ahmadinejad paid attention to Africa. Rouhani forgot about Africa because of the attention that he and his team paid to the European Union and the nuclear negotiations. But now Raisi has discovered it, and as we speak, the Iranian foreign minister is on a tour of Mali and Tanzania. In terms of domestic politics, we started by a discussion of precisely what kind of a political system is Iran today, and more specifically, what kind of a political system is Iran likely to be post-Khamenei. And of course, we heard three really key scenarios in terms of a personalist or cult of personality state, a state in which the military or the coercive apparatuses are calling the shots, or kind of some sort of stale authoritarian political system. We also heard a discussion on the extent to which Raisi is ideological as compared to pragmatic. We know, anecdotally, we know through the Iranian social media that Raisi, at least by a good chunk of the so-called modern middle classes, isn't taken seriously. And he seems to be surprising us. He's not necessarily gifted in the art of oratory. He's not a very good speaker. He is not. He doesn't have the persona that Rouhani had. But at least he seems to be getting things done in relation to tangible discussions with the Saudis. And on that front, there have been major movements. We know just today and yesterday, the Emiratis announced that their ambassador is going to be returning to Tehran any day. And of course, we are, as I mentioned, in the midst of hearing from the Americans. By far, the biggest challenge is, as we heard, how will Raisi connect with the grandchildren of the revolution, with Khomeini's grandchildren, the generation of Iranians in their 20s and up that have had no direct experience of the formative experience of the revolution, the formative experience of the so-called sacred defense, the war with Iraq, and these folks that do not necessarily have a personal vested interest in the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic. How will Raisi connect with them and connect with the grandchildren of the revolution? And of course, that directly ties to the economic challenge. How will Raisi or any administration in Iran be able to solve Iran's economic problems? Will Iran's economy grow? Will it develop, or will it simply survive? Will it simply putter along as it has and continue to perform far below potential, but nonetheless it will continue to survive? So to end, what we see is that Iran is on the precipice of change. Iran is indeed about to change. It has been changing, but its changes, even more important changes, are coming. Khamenei is 82 years old, and not even supreme leaders will live forever. Sooner or later, Khamenei era is going to be over, and even if there is a protege that is going to change, that is going to take over after Khamenei, even if there is a smooth transition, nevertheless, there are going to be changes in personality, in style, in networks, in the way that civil-military relations in Iran will unfold, in the way that Khamenei has been able to carve out a place for himself in the Iranian body politic. A couple of years ago, aware of his own mortality, Khamenei started talking about what he called the second step of the revolution. He started changing Friday prayer imams. He started encouraging newer generations of Iranians to take over. The old generation of revolutionaries that Iran had, Rafsanjani's generation, are all gone. Khamenei is one of the only ones of that generation that remains. And there's a new generation of revolutionary Iranians that are beginning to be placed in positions of power and influence. But nonetheless, we know that major changes are coming, and the gap between the Iranian state and Iranian society continues to be as wide as ever. And that is another area. What that means is that next year, for our conference, there are plenty of topics to discuss, and there are plenty of questions for us to explore in our conference next year. And I hope to see all of you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect timing.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
On behalf of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, we thank you all, especially those who contributed here, the panelists, the organizers, those who worked behind the scenes, and those who followed us online. Thank you, and next year, we don't know the topic, but we will definitely work on it, and we'll let you know. Thank you.